Alright, book brats, I did it. I read A Court of Mist and Fury, so let's talk about it. Right off the bat, I will say this. This book was so much better than the first book. Most people said the first book is the tax you pay to get to the good stuff. I get it. So why don't we just start at the beginning and go from there. By the way, spoiler alert. So the book starts out with this chick named Feyre, who used to be a human, who's now a fae because she died in a cave and some people gathered around her and sprinkled some fairy dust on her. She's bigger and stronger and better, and she's learning how to navigate this new life, and she's dealing with some PTSD, some flashbacks of underneath the mountain. Also, there's a wedding going on that I, and presumably most readers, care goose egg about. The wedding is between this guy named Tamlin and this new, improved, better Taylor's version of Feyre. So they're planning this wedding, everything's hunky-dory. They get to the day of the wedding, and Feyre all of a sudden has some second thoughts. And why wouldn't she have second thoughts? Her soon-to-be husband has the temperament of a baby who lost its pacifier. She's about to say, I do, but in her mind she's thinking, I don't, and all of a sudden, this guy named Daddy Rhys's Pieces steps in and saves the day. Rhys is the other handsome gentleman in this book that Feyre is caught in a custody battle between, and now it's his week to take her away to what's called the Night Court. They get to the Night Court, and Rhys tells Feyre that everything's good here, nothing's going to hurt her, she's not a prisoner, and I'm thinking, this is just a retelling of the first story you told. Basically, Hangover 2. He also teaches her how to read, because in the first book she can't read, she can only paint, and I'm thinking, why are you teaching her to read? What are your motives, sir? I don't necessarily think I should like you, but I do like you. Tell me more. He's also teaching her how to shield her mind from people that could potentially penetrate her thoughts, like Snape did to Harry Potter to guard against Lord Voldemort. And the week is over, and then he sends her back to Tammy, who has destroyed his castle because # wasn't hugged as a child. Then Feyre and Tammy fight because Feyre decided to give money to an ugly mermaid because she couldn't pay the tithe that she owed. What's his name? I don't know. It comes back later in the book and it's pretty important. And before you know it, it's Rhys, the toxic tutor's week to take her back to the Night Court, but she doesn't want to go because this woman can't see Prince Charming even if he's standing in front of her. By the way, I've had to remind myself while reading this book that Feyre is about 19 years old. And the people that she's dating and banging and all that good stuff are about 500, as long as he doesn't look 500. If he looks 25 and she looks 17, that's okay. But if he looks old and she looks young, well, we have a word for that. Anyway, Rhys and Feyre start talking, and then she starts talking about how she's having problems in the spring court, but she's trying to make it work. And I remember thinking to myself, Feyre, honey. Then Rhys tutors her a little bit more, and I'm thinking, I like the Night Court better. Let's stay here a while, and that lasts about 2 seconds, and now she's shipped back to the Spring Court. Yeah, you guessed it. Fey and Tam Tam fight again because she wants to go on an adventure with him. He wants to keep her safe, so he locks her in his castle like some 90s Christian parents. She gets mad about it, blows herself up, and this chick named Moore comes in, flies her away back to the Night Court. She starts talking to Rhys, and Rhys is like, hey, do you want to stay here, or do you want to go back to the Spring Court? But Feyre can't get over the fact that she got locked up, so she says, I never want to go back. I want to stay here in Daddyland. Then Rhys takes Feyre to his city of Vegas. I don't know, it started with a V. And there we have a brief introduction of what we can call the Bat Street Boys. They're essentially friends / relatives, but not really relatives. More friends, but kind of enemies. But I don't know, it's a weird... It's like all of our families. Just, we can talk, but we can't get along kind of a thing. Anyway, then he takes her on some magic carpet ride, and they fly around, look at stuff with his big wings. It's big wings. They land at this place where they're going to eat. Then Rhys and Feyre have this nice moment of connection and love. And he's about to say, hey, you are my fire. You are my desire. Until one of the Bat Street Boys interrupts everything. And then they go inside and have dinner. We find out at some point that Rhys, his whole attitude in the last book was just a front to protect all of his family in Vegas. And he's actually a really nice guy. And then Rhys talks about he's trying to accomplish this big thing, and he wants Feyre to join him. She's like, hey, I'll join you. Let's form a pact. Rhysand says to Feyre, hey, I have a task for you. We got to go to Azkaban and talk to a Dementor. So they go to Azkaban, but she can't really get in because she's still dealing with PTSD. So she says, I want to go home. He takes her back to his castle. Next day, they go back to Azkaban to try again. They make it inside, and they meet what we can call the Bone Boy. The Bone Boy reveals that there's this thing called the Great Cauldron that presumably created all things. It has 3 feet, and in my mind, I'm picturing a weird-looking clawfoot bathtub. And apparently the feet have been taken and sent to whoever knows. It's just not where they are currently. But the good news is you can find them if you have this certain book. The bad news is that the book is now 2 books, and they are not here. Now the search begins for the broken book and the clawfoot bathtub feet. So Rhys wants to find out if Feyre can track certain items, so he sends her to steal his mother's purity ring from a person called the Weaver, who is essentially a cross between Rumpelstiltskin and Jeffrey Dahmer if they were on an episode of Hoarders. She steals the purity ring, but in the process burns the house down, goes back to Rhys. Rhys shows her a memory of some nympho chick he had run in with. Go to the human world to talk to some queens that have part of the book, presumably, but they can't talk to the queen, so instead they go visit the family of Feyre. They have dinner with her sisters, which doesn't go well because Nesta, one of the sisters, is acting like a real derogatory term for the female genitalia. And Rhys's Pieces tells Fey that she's got to train harder because she's essentially a baby coming into her power, so he sends her into the woods for tummy time to build up her magical muscles. Also during this book, Rhys Witherspoon and Finagle are having this weird game of magical telephone where they can send I don't know how it works, but it's happening. So she trains more. She uses her hatred of Tamlin as fuel for her training, like a girl throwing darts at an ex-boyfriend's picture. They go to the summer court to find another piece of the book, and they meet this dude named Tarquin, and you guessed it, he's very attractive. And he's also a really nice guy. He cares about the environment, he cares about people, he wants to spread love and joy. So what do? They steal from him. They do a heist to try to get the book. Feyre finds out in the process that she can shape-shift like Ditto the Pokemon. Everything works out, she gets the book, and now it's on to the next piece of the book because she's gotta catch them all. And there's a lot more flirting between Rhys Peace and Fey, and finally they're able to meet the mortal queens. But it turns out that the queens are rather evil, so Rhysand and Feyre go cosplay as evil people at the Nightmare City Court, whatever it's called, to try to steal an orb. Like Spyro on PlayStation. So they steal the orb, and then we learn that Rhys Beast's family was killed by Tantrum, and upon hearing this, Feyre decides that she wants to nude paint Rhys like she's Leonardo DiCaprio from Titanic. Then some more flirting happens. They meet Lucy Boosie in the woods, and Lucy Boosie tries to get Fey to go home to Tantrum, and she won't go, and so he just leaves. And at one point, Rhys is flying with Feyre over some beautiful mountains. He gets shot with ash arrows, starts going down, gets kidnapped, taken to a cave, and Feyre has to go find him. But she frees him from the cave. She kills everybody involved, but he's bleeding out, and she needs to know how to heal him, so she goes to visit Mr. T in the woods. So Mr. T spills the tea and lets Feyre know that her and Rhys are actually mates, which essentially makes them penguins, and that Rhys is known for a long time. Feyre gets mad about this because she gets mad about everything, and so she goes and gets Rhys, does the healing process that Mr. T told her about, but is so angry that she drops him off in front of his castle in the mud and says, "Hey, I'm going away for 3 days. Peace out." So Moore takes Feyre to a cabin that they own that's very magical, and while she's there, she realizes, oh, I probably shouldn't have left him there in the mud. He probably did it for a reason, not telling me that we're penguin lovers. But rather than go apologize, she graffitis the cabin. Rhys shows up at the cabin, and I'm hoping that he says to Feyre, you know what? Life is too short, even for an immortal, to be with you. But instead of that, Rhys looks at her and says, hey, we have tickets to a donkey show in Tijuana, and the good news is, you and I were the stars. So Feyre plays Donkey Dong with Rhys for a couple of rounds, and then they go back to the night court. Then they meet with the queens and show them the Spyro orb that apparently turns into a pensive that can hold memories. Queens aren't buying it, so they leave, but conveniently leave the book behind. So now they have the book, but then their city gets attacked by the Mad Hatter, who Feyre ends up killing because she's now Superwoman. So now that they have both pieces of the book, they find the cauldron pretty much instantly underneath the unnamed King of Hybern's castle. So they meet the King of Hybern, who had been working with Tammy Boy and Lucy Boosie to tear down the wall that separates the human world from the Feybe world. And they've also kidnapped Feyre's sisters, and so they bring them out. The King of Hybern has a plan to dip Feyre's sisters in the magical bathtub water to turn them immortal, and for some reason Feyre decides that this is the worst thing that could possibly happen to her sisters. Even though she herself is immortal, she doesn't want her sisters to live forever, which tells me, hey, I want y'all to die one day. So the King of Hybern dips the sisters in the bathtub water. They come out bigger, stronger, Taylor's versions of themselves, and Feyre just can't handle this. She breaks down, her bowels become watery, or whatever else the author says. So Feyre gets this grand idea that she's going to tell the King of Hybern to break the tie between her and Rhys's Pieces because somehow that's going to make it better. So the King of Hybern agrees to it, and he breaks the tie that she shares with Rhys's, but not really. Then Feyre goes back to the spring court with Tammy Boy and Lucy Boosie, but in reality, she's still kind of connected to her penguin lover, Rhys, and so now she's just a spy in the spring court rather than Tammy Boy's lover. Long story short, this is a good book, and I'm going to give it 5 bats. And I just started this one, so stay tuned.